Schedule 1 just humbled the gaming industry, getting over 400,000 concurrent players on Steam in less than a week. It's got studio heads of the biggest AAA games out there scratching their heads, wondering how can they be getting outcompeted by some dude named Tyler that had a marketing budget of basically $0. It's almost like if you make a good enough game, you don't even have to try so hard to convince the players to buy it. In fact, they might even go as far as recommending it to their friends, and that's how you end up with a massive viral success like Schedule 1. Now, the game's not without its flaws, and we'll get to my critiques in a second, but it's no surprise that the indie side of gaming has been exploding in popularity lately with how disappointing the big budget titles have been. It feels like every time you decide to buy the new Dragon Age or Assassin's Creed, you're just playing Russian roulette. You're praying not to throw your money down the drain with how some of these companies have been treating their consumers lately. And with Nintendo having just normalized $80 video games, $90 for physical cartridges, well, the gaming community has just been leaning heavier and heavier into like these smaller projects that you can enjoy without having to break the bank. And as a direct response to that, we're seeing more and more indie projects turning small studios and solo developers into overnight sensations. A few good examples of this is a game about digging a hole that sold hundreds of thousands of copies back in February, and more recently, Repo, the Lethal Company-inspired horror game, broke 270,000 peak concurrents last month. Indie hits are becoming more and more common because they're filling a gap that the AAA studios left behind, and we're going to talk about that. Schedule 1 basically just hit the ground running to an already staggering 68,000 concurrent players on release, and it's only kept going up from there all the way to a 400,000 concurrent peak, putting it in the top 3 most played games on Steam. There's no official number yet, but it's estimated that there's been over 2 million copies already sold, and even with the 30% cut that Steam gets from each sale, that still puts the developer of Schedule 1, called Tyler, into multi-millionaire status literally overnight. And the crazy thing about it is that Schedule 1 isn't just another sloppy asset flip game that was just loosely put together to try to bait the big streamers into playing it and getting this free wave of massive exposure. I'm pretty sure you guys know what I'm talking about here when we're talking about this sort of game. But no, this is one of the very few cases where the developer actively undersold just how much content he packed into this game. I think the best way to describe Schedule 1, it's a resource management game. You know, there's tons of moving parts to running a drug empire, and you have to find a way to optimize the workflow. And, you know, if you're playing it in co-op, that makes it even funner because it's not like every single player is stuck doing the exact same thing. One person could be tending to the plants, the other one could be doing the baggies and the jars, or one person could just be doing the runs or finding out how to craft different drugs. The players are just putting hours into Schedule 1, building their Breaking Bad type of empire, and it's no surprise why everybody keeps calling this game Walter White Simulator. It's a genuinely fun time that some of the players are even going as far as asking Tyler, the developer, to raise the price of the game and that they'd be willing to pay $50 for it because not just of the amount of playtime that you get out of it, but because of the quality of Schedule 1 as well. Heck, the developer even went as far as giving out a free demo on Steam that could net you hours of gameplay, and I think it's one of the main reasons why people resonated so much with Schedule 1 and its developers, because in today's day and age, you know, realistically, what kind of lunatic just gives away free hours of content for free like that, you know? It sounds like such an anti-business practice that it would make a company like EA or Ubisoft have a complete meltdown because it's doing what AAA stopped doing or caring about a long time ago, and the reason why they've been struggling so hard lately with consumer trust. Schedule 1 is putting the gamers first. It's prioritizing player enjoyment versus profit. And funny how that works at the end of the day, because it ends up going all the way back around into being a genius business move, because now you're giving people the chance to try the game out. All the clips on social media just start popping up everywhere. Everything's going viral. And as a result, it just spreads like wildfire through word of mouth. That's why when you compare this to like the current AAA lineup that we've seen throughout the year, Schedule 1 is just dwarfing games that were developed by hundreds of people. Now, obviously, Schedule 1 being the first ever project that this developer drops on Steam, it's on early access. It's not a hyper-polished or flawless experience, okay? There's a few bugs here and there with the employees. The multiplayer has some issues with disconnecting, and some people are even reporting their game crashing too. And you know, for some people, that they see these sort of issues, and it sort of adds that level of charm that they're looking for when they're playing an indie game. You know, sometimes watching an NPC start spazzing out in front of you just adds that sense of comedy to your playthrough. But for the most part, when it comes to like the game crashes itself, that's a pretty frustrating thing to have to deal with, you know? It's a completely different thing versus accidentally falling through the map and getting, you know, at least getting a funny clip out of that. And if the players are paying for a game, they should be at least allowed to expect a stable experience, but it's not technically so bad that it's a deal breaker, you know, because Schedule 1 right now wouldn't be sitting at overwhelmingly positive reviews on Steam if it was just a piece of hot garbo. Also, if you just happen to go through the patch notes for Schedule 1, Tyler, the developer, has been working on fixes for the game non-stop. You know, he's been pushing out updates like crazy. I think it's important to note that this is just one person, right? instead, not a studio filled with 500 employees that just happened to ship out a AAA broken mess for twice the price, and Tyler the developer is still managing to have a smoother launch than all of them, while also having a roadmap of all the future content that he's planning to add into the game, like more drugs, more chemicals, and even a fishing minigame. There's also a little bit of controversy surrounding Schedule 1 that popped up recently, because I saw that the publishers for Drug Dealer Simulator 1 and 2 decided to open up an investigation on a potential copyright infringement that Schedule 1 might have committed. The publishers are calling out Schedule 1 for committing an act of unfair competition, and now there's not a lot of information about this yet, and it's also not a direct accusation. It's more of a, hey, we have a drug dealing game, but your drug dealing game just went absolutely viral. We're gonna find out if you just happen to copy some of our stuff. And maybe there's some grounds to it, maybe not. I haven't played every single drug dealing simulator game that's out there, so I can't tell you for myself if there's any similarities, but you know, it's just something we'll just have to wait and see. So to talk about the gameplay itself, Schedule 1 is basically a simulator game, meaning that there's a bunch of different ways to play it according to whatever your style is. So just because you saw someone on Twitch playing Schedule 1 doesn't mean that you're gonna do exactly what they do once you get your hands on it. You know, it's not a story type of game, not a single player kind of game where everybody just gets the same experience. Also, the idea of adding co-op to this game, I think is also just a genius move in terms of marketability, because this game isn't the type of game that needed to have co-op to begin with, but having that nice extra touch is a pretty good way of having Schedule 1 spread more through word of mouth, because now you have friends wanting to get the games together and play together. And I think that this is where Schedule 1 really shines, you know, the multiplayer aspect of it, because you can have a totally controlled, totally efficient gameplay experience, or you can just have absolute mayhem happening in the city. You know, the freedom in an open world and how the NPCs interact with you, and how you can set up for some really entertaining emergent storytelling. You can actually end up accidentally sinking a couple of hours into the game and forget that there's plans you gotta tend to and sell, you know? And the crafting system is really one of the main selling points for Schedule 1, because it feels very meticulous, but in a very satisfying way, you know? You're not just pressing a button and things start automatically happening, like the plants plant themselves, the baggies get automatically packaged, or anything like that, you know? It's a very satisfying, tactile sort of gameplay, where every action has its own little consequence that you just gotta go through to really get that feeling of playing that resource management type game. And I really think that the one thing that ties all of this together is just the sheer stupidity of it all, man. You know, the names that they use for some of the strains and the ingredients, like green crack, motor oil, horse semen, you know, just seeing these and the effects that they have on the NPCs that you sell them to, it's just a blast, man. It's just really fun. Like, I remember reading that Tyler the developer wanted to go with these wacky names and use this fun-looking cartoony aesthetic for Schedule 1, because he wants to take the serious topic that is substance and drugs, but make it less serious, you know, make it less dark and gritty, and it just sets up for the game having some really funny dark humor interactions. So I think Tyler the developer made a game that perfectly fits the gap that a lot of AAA studios left behind when they started hyper-focusing on appealing investors, having monetization directors on board for single-player games, and just taking advantage of their player base, thinking that they would happily consume all of the slop that companies like Ubisoft and EA and the such just put out, no matter how unfinished and how unplayer-friendly it is. And I think the reason we're sort of seeing the second golden age for indie gaming at the moment is pretty simple, you know? Indie developers aren't out of touch with the reality of what consumers want. They're making games that they're actually passionate about, that directly focus on player enjoyment, and not necessarily on what an executive team of investors think the game will sell. If anything, the virality of how Schedule 1 spread over TikTok and over social medias is just proof that the players crave this sort of authentic connection with the game and its developers. They want something that feels like was made specifically for them. It's not that there isn't enough games to play out there, it's just that it's getting harder and harder to actually feel like something was made for you to enjoy, instead of feeling like you're being marketed to. And that's why, even though there's talks about how there's a gaming downtrend happening at the moment, the indie side of things is doing just fine, because at the end of the day, it just boils down to people making cool shit online for people to enjoy, and that's why there's studios out there pouring hundreds of millions of dollars, and they can't even crack a 20,000 peak concurrence on release, while you have games like Schedule 1, for example, turning solo indie devs into overnight millionaires. But yeah, that's all I really want to talk about with you guys, so thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.